The thing about dares is that they only work on people who have something to prove. Karen Ellis had nothing to prove to anyone, not to her roommate Jade, not to the girls crowded into their off-campus apartment with cheap wine and bad judgment, and certainly not to the man they were all whispering about across the courtyard of Blackwood University's most exclusive social event of the fall semester. But she was 3 glasses of Moscato deep, and her pride had always been her most expensive habit. "I dare you," Jade said again, this time with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Walk over there. Kiss Wook Shin on the mouth. In front of everyone." The room went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet, the held breath, someone is about to make a terrible decision kind of quiet. "You're insane," said Priya from the couch. "She'd be dead by morning," added Demi, and she was only half joking. Karen looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackwood social hall, across the glittering space filled with the university's elite, to where he stood. Wook Shin. 23 years old. Korean American. Second-year grad student in international finance, though everyone knew the finance degree was just theater. He stood at the far end of the room near the marble columns, a glass of something amber in his hand, wearing a black turtleneck and fitted trousers that looked like they cost more than Karen's entire semester of books. 2 men stood slightly behind him, not friends clearly. Guards. The kind of men who had very still eyes. He wasn't conventionally approachable. That was the polite way to say it. The impolite way, Wook Shin was the youngest son of the Shin crime family, one of the most powerful Korean-American organized crime networks on the East Coast. He was brilliant, cold, and by all accounts had never been seen in the company of a woman he actually respected. He moved through people like weather, present then gone, leaving damage in his wake. He also happened to be, in the most irritating and inconvenient way possible, breathtaking. Karen set down her wine glass. "What do I get if I do it?" she asked. Jade grinned. "My cousin's apartment in Paris for spring break." Karen picked up her clutch. "Karen," Priya started. "I'll be right back." She had to be honest with herself. Somewhere between the moment she left the group and the moment she reached him, she was terrified. Not in the way that made her want to turn around, but in the way that sharpened everything, made her hyper-aware of the music, the warmth of the room, the sound of her own heels on the hardwood floor. People noticed her moving through the crowd. Some stepped aside. A few turned to look, sensing something was about to happen the way animals sense rain. She stopped 3 feet from him. Up close, Wook Shin was even more than the window had allowed. His jaw was sharp, his eyes darker than she'd expected, and there was a stillness to him that wasn't peace. It was control. Total, deliberate, exhausting control. Like a man who had decided long ago that the world did not deserve his involuntary reactions. One of his guards stepped forward. She held up a hand. "Give me 30 seconds, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. The guard looked at Wook. Wook looked at Karen. His expression didn't change. "You're the Ellis girl. Pre-law." She blinked. He knew who she was. "Karen," she said. "And yes. You're in the wrong part of the room." "Probably," she agreed. "But I made a bet and I don't lose bets." Something moved in his eyes. Not warmth, more like interest, clinical and brief, the way a scientist looks at something unexpected under a microscope. "What bet?" She stepped forward. She would think about this moment for a long time afterward, the precise second before she moved, when she had every opportunity to laugh it off and walk away. She didn't. She reached up, put her hand against the side of his jaw, felt him go absolutely rigid with shock, and pressed her mouth to his. For exactly 3 seconds. His lips were warm. He tasted like the whiskey in his glass and something cooler underneath. He didn't push her away. He didn't kiss her back. He simply went still, like a man who had been struck by something he didn't understand and was calculating rapidly what it was. She stepped back. "Thank you," she said. Her voice wobbled just barely. "Have a good evening." She turned and walked back the way she had come. She did not run. She was very proud of that. Behind her, one of the guards, Seo the older one, leaned toward Wook and murmured something in Korean. Wook said nothing. His hand, still holding the whiskey glass, had not moved. His expression had not changed. But for the first time in years, something underneath his sternum felt like it had been rearranged. He watched her disappear into the crowd. "Find out everything about her," he said. Karen woke up the next morning with Paris on the horizon and a deeply unsettling memory of warm lips and very dark eyes. She pushed it away. It was a dare. She'd won. It was over. It was not over. The flowers arrived at 9 a.m., not a bouquet, our arrangement, the kind that required its own structural support, All white orchids and dark calla lilies and something that smelled like winter. The card read only, "You have interesting courage. W." "Oh no," said Jade, who had been there when Karen opened the door. "It's nothing," Karen said. The second arrangement arrived at noon. The note that time, "I don't like being surprised. I'm choosing to make an exception." "Karen," said Jade. "It's a power move," Karen said. "He's making a point. It'll stop." It did not stop. By the third day, the flowers had been joined by a leather-bound copy of Thurgood Marshall, American Revolutionary, her favorite book, which she had mentioned exactly once in a campus lecture 3 weeks ago, and a handwritten note that said, "You should know that I remember everything." That was when Karen sat down. She was not a woman who frightened easily. She had grown up in Baltimore with a mother who worked double shifts and a grandmother who had survived things that would have broken most people twice over. She had gotten herself into Blackwood University on a full academic scholarship through sheer relentless work, and she had survived 2 years among the privileged, the careless, and the occasionally cruel without losing herself. But this was different. Because the gifts weren't threatening. They weren't possessive. They were attentive, which was somehow worse, because attention from Wook Shin felt like standing under a spotlight that hadn't quite decided whether it wanted to illuminate you or burn you. She wrote a note back. "I appreciate the gifts. I want to be clear that the kiss was a dare and not an invitation. Please don't send anything else." She left it at the front desk of the administrative building where she knew he had a weekly meeting. He responded within the hour through his guard CO with a single white card. "Have dinner with me." She crumpled it. Then she smoothed it out again. Then she crumpled it again. She ran into him in the university library 4 days later. It was late, nearly midnight, the kind of hour when only desperate students and the chronically overachieving remained. She was in the East Wing, surrounded by case law binders, when she looked up and found him. Standing at the end of her row of shelves, holding a book he clearly hadn't come here to read. "Are you following me?" she demanded. "I have a library card," he said. "That's not what I asked." He walked to the table across from her and sat down, and the infuriating thing was that he moved with such perfect ease, such complete ownership of whatever space he occupied, that it almost looked natural. Like he belonged in her library, in her midnight, in the particular silence that had been hers before he arrived. "I want to understand you," he said. "I'm not a puzzle. Everything is a puzzle." He tilted his head slightly. "You kissed me in front of 100 people who know what I am. You weren't drunk enough to lose your coordination. I watched you walk in. You knew the risk. It was a dare. You could have refused the dare." She opened her mouth, closed it. "What do you actually want?" she asked instead. He considered this with a seriousness that surprised her. Like the question deserved a real answer and he was genuinely searching for one. "I don't know," he said finally. "That's new for me." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who commanded rooms and frightened grown men, sitting across from her in the library at midnight, admitting uncertainty like it cost him something. "I'll have coffee with you," she said. "Not dinner. Coffee." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. But close. "Tomorrow," he said. "Thursday," she countered. "I have a brief due Wednesday." He nodded once like this was a negotiated treaty and stood. He left the book on the table. She looked at it after he was gone. It was Beloved by Toni Morrison. She didn't know what to do with that. He took her to a place she hadn't known existed, a small Korean cafe tucked into the back end of a building 2 blocks from campus, the kind of place that had no sign outside, just a heavy wooden door and the smell of roasted barley tea drifting through it. The owner, an older Korean woman named Mrs. O, greeted Wook with the familiar exasperation of someone who had known him a long time. "You're bringing girls here now?" she said in accented English, eyeing Karen with open curiosity. "She's not," Wook started. "I'm Karen," Karen said, extending her hand. "It's lovely to meet you." Mrs. O looked at her hand. Then at Wook. Then she shook Karen's hand with a firm grip and something approaching approval. "Sit," she said. "I'll bring the good tea." They sat across from each other in a window booth, and without his guards flanking him and without 100 eyes watching, Wook looked, not smaller, exactly. Just more specific. Like a high-resolution version of the impression she'd formed from a distance. "Tell me about Baltimore," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You did research." "I said I remember everything. I didn't say that was all I do." She told him about Baltimore. Not the version she gave in scholarship interviews, the sanitized, triumphant narrative of adversity overcome. The real version. Her mother's hands, always cracked from the hospital work. Her grandmother's garden, where she used to sit and read until it got dark. The specific flavor of wanting something badly enough that it scared you. He listened without interrupting. This, she would come to understand, was one of his rarest qualities. His stillness wasn't absence, it was attention. He listened the way a person listened when they actually intended to remember. "Your turn," she said, when she realized she'd been talking for 20 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. "My father," he said carefully, "built something that I have spent my entire life being told I will inherit. I have never been asked whether I want it." It was not what she expected him to say. "Do you?" she asked. "Want it?" "I want—" He stopped. Looked at his tea. "I've never wanted anything that didn't come with a cost I could calculate in advance. You are the first thing in years that I can't calculate." She looked at him steadily. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "I'm not very good at those," he admitted. "I noticed." The corner of his mouth moved. "You're not afraid of me." "I didn't say that. But you're not letting the fear run you. My grandmother used to say that fear is just respect wearing the wrong clothes." She wrapped her hands around her tea. "I respect what you are. I don't know yet if I respect who you are." He was quiet for a long moment. "That's fair," he said. It was the most disarming thing she'd heard him say. Wook didn't tell anyone what was happening to him. Partly because he didn't have people he told things to. His relationships, such as they were functional. Loyal. But not intimate. He had never needed intimacy. He had been taught, young and efficiently, that intimacy was a liability. But he found himself thinking about Karen Ellis at 3 a.m. when he should have been reviewing port logistics with his father's associates. He found himself walking past the east wing of the library at midnight on the off chance she'd be there. He found himself once standing outside the window of a coffee shop where he knew she had a study group, not even going in, just standing there. Where? Co, who had been with him since he was 15 and had seen many things, said nothing for 2 weeks. Then one morning over black coffee he said, "You're going to mess this up if you're not careful." "I'm always careful," Wook said. "You're careful with things you understand." Co set down his cup. "She's different." "I know. Your father's going to ask questions." Wook looked out the window. "Let him." Karen's friends had opinions. "He's dangerous," said Priya, who had taken the time to actually Google the Shin family and come back looking pale. "He's beautiful," said Demi, which wasn't relevant but not incorrect. "He keeps looking at you like you're something he found that he doesn't know what to do with," said Jade, who was the most perceptive of them all. "Which is either romantic or concerning." "Both," Karen said. "Both," Jade agreed. She went to his apartment on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the coffee. She told herself it was because he'd asked her over to look at something. He'd somehow obtained a copy of a landmark environmental law case file she'd been looking for, through means she chose not to examine too closely. The apartment was not what she expected. She'd prepared herself for something cold and minimalist, all sharp lines and power. What she found instead was curated. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, a record player in the corner, architectural drawings pinned to one wall alongside photographs of places she recognized from news articles. Seoul, Vancouver, Sao Paulo. And in the kitchen he was cooking. He looked up when Co let her in, and something crossed his face so quickly she almost missed it. Vulnerability. The specific vulnerability of someone who has been caught caring about something. "You cook," she said. "My mother insisted." He turned back to the stove. "Sit. It's almost done." She sat at the kitchen island and watched him, and the domestic quietness of it. This man who reportedly made hardened criminals hesitant to make eye contact, carefully adjusting the heat under a pan of doenjang jjigae, made something ache pleasantly in her chest. "What happened to your mother?" she asked gently. She gathered enough from various conversations that she was not present. He was quiet for a moment. "She left when I was 9. She loved my father but she couldn't love what he did. She tried to take me with her." Pause. "He didn't let her." "I'm sorry," Karen said. He set a bowl in front of her. "Don't be. It made me what I am." "And what are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. Someone who doesn't know what to do with a woman who asks that question like she actually wants to know the answer. She looked down at the bowl of stew, rich and fragrant and clearly made with attention, and back up at him. "I do want to know," she said. "That's the whole problem." He sat across from her. For a while neither of them spoke. They just ate in a kitchen that felt, for the first time in Wook's memory, like it had been used for something other than survival. It happened 6 weeks after the dare. He walked her back to her apartment building after a late study session. She'd started letting him do this, telling herself it was practical, that the area around campus wasn't always safe at night, and not examining too closely the fact that the safest she'd ever felt was when he was nearby. At the door to her building they stopped. The night was cold, the particular dry cold of late October, and her breath made small clouds. He had given her his coat somewhere around the third block because she'd mentioned being chilly and he'd taken it off before she finished the sentence. She turned to give it back. He was standing very close. Not encroaching. Wook, she had learned, never encroached. He respected space with a deliberateness that was itself a kind of statement. But they were close enough that she could see the exact expression on his face. He was looking at her like she was something he'd been trying to solve for weeks and had just, in this specific moment, accepted that he couldn't. You know, she said, the first kiss was a dare. I'm aware, he said. This one isn't. She kissed him. This one was nothing like the first. The first had been a statement, a performance, 3 seconds of audacity. This one was slow. She leaned up and he met her halfway, and his hands came to her face with a carefulness that undid her completely, like he was holding something he was terrified of dropping. He kissed her back this time. Warm and unhurried and thorough, like he was memorizing the shape of it, cataloging it, storing it somewhere no one else could reach. When they finally separated, she pressed her forehead against his chin and felt his exhale against her hair, and for a moment neither of them pretended that this was not exactly as significant as it was. Karen, he said, and his voice had lost its usual smoothness just barely. I know, she said. This is going to be complicated. I know that too. She stepped back and looked at him. His hands were still at her jaw. He dropped them slowly like he was fighting the gesture. I don't do this, he said. I don't know how to do this. Then we'll figure it out, she said. That's what people do. She went inside. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time after she disappeared. Co, parked at the curb, watched him in the rearview mirror. I told you, he said to no one in particular. The complication arrived in the form of Wook's father. Han Shin was not a man who traveled from New York to see his son without reason. He arrived on a Tuesday with 2 cars and the particular energy of a man who already knew something he wanted confirmed. Wook received him in the apartment, and Karen was not there, which was fortunate, because the conversation that followed was one he needed to have without her in it. The Ellis girl, his father said, sitting across from him with a cup of tea he didn't drink. A pre-law scholarship student. No family connections. No leverage. He paused. Interesting choice. It's not a choice that affects the organization, Wook said. Everything you do affects the organization. Then I'll manage the effects. His father looked at him for a long moment. Han Shin was in his 60s, still sharp, with eyes that had seen enough to be difficult to read. Your mother, he said, also had that look about her. Like she believed in things. Don't. I'm not threatening her. Han Shin stood. I'm telling you that it ends one of 2 ways. She leaves or she stays and becomes part of this world. Make sure you know which way it's going before you let this go further. He left. Wook stood at the window for a long time. He went to her that evening. He didn't call first and she opened the door still holding a highlighter, looking at him like she'd already started preparing for the version of this conversation she'd known was coming. Sit down, she said. He sat. Your father came, she said. It wasn't a question. How did you know? Jade saw the cars. She texted me immediately. Karen sat across from him, tucked her feet under her, and looked at him steadily. Tell me what he said. He told her. All of it without softening. She was quiet for a while after. And what do you want? She asked. Same question as the library weeks ago. I want you to be safe, he said. That's the most important thing to me. I need you to know that. I didn't ask what you want for me. I asked what you want. He looked at her. You. It came out simpler and more direct than he intended, and he watched her absorb it, the word landing somewhere visible, making her press her lips together briefly. I'm not leaving school, she said. I'm not stopping my life. I'm not disappearing into your world. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? He reached forward and took her hand carefully like he was picking up something that could break. He looked down at her fingers. Her hands were warm and steady as they always were, and he thought about her grandmother's garden, about the way she'd described learning to want things without letting the wanting make her afraid. I'm asking if you'll trust me to figure this out, he said. Knowing that it's complicated. Knowing what I am. She looked at him for a long time. You have to be honest with me, she said. All the way. Not protected, not managed. Honest. That's harder for me than it is for most people, he said. I know. I'm asking anyway. Okay, he said. She squeezed his hand. Okay. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Wook's life and the best. He learned her. Not the way he'd initially observed her, cataloging, calculating, but in the softer, more vulnerable way that required him to stop processing and simply be present. He learned that she woke up before 6 every morning and that the first 30 minutes were sacred and not for conversation. That she argued with documentary narrators out loud. That she kept her grandmother's recipe cards in a tin in her desk drawer and read them sometimes like other people read letters. That she laughed with her whole body, not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that crinkled the skin at the corners of her eyes and made her grab whatever was nearest for balance. She learned him too. She learned that his coldness was armor, not character. That underneath it was a man who had been taught very young that warmth was a strategic liability, and who had been practicing detachment so long it had started to feel real. She learned that he had wanted to study architecture before his father redirected him. That he kept the drawings on his wall not as decoration but as a reminder of a version of himself that had existed before everything got complicated. That he wasn't good at saying how he felt but was extraordinary at showing it. In the Lee Morgan record he found for her at a vintage shop because she'd mentioned once that her grandmother had loved it, in the way he always made sure she'd eaten before a late study session, in the absolute steadiness of his presence whenever she needed it. They fought. This too was part of it. Karen did not manage her opinions to preserve peace. She never had, it wasn't in her, and Wook had never been in a relationship where anyone pushed back on him without a different kind of motivation. The first real argument was about honesty, specifically about a situation involving someone in his network who had done something she found ethically indefensible, and she told him so directly. He went cold. It was instinct, the armor going up, fast and smooth. "This is my world," he said. "You said you understood that." "I understand it," she said. "I don't have to be okay with all of it. Those are different things. You're asking me to justify decisions that are not yours to judge. I'm asking you to be a person who knows the difference between necessity and choice." She looked at him steadily. "You're smart enough to know the difference. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He was quiet for a long time. "I don't need you to approve of everything I do," he said finally. The cold had faded slightly. "Good. Because I won't. But I need you to take me seriously when I tell you something matters." He looked at her for a moment. "I take everything you say seriously. That's the problem." It wasn't an apology exactly. But it was Wook and she was learning to translate. "Come here," she said and held out her hand. He crossed the room. She took his hand and held it, and they stayed like that for a while, in the particular quiet of two people who have argued their way to a better understanding of each other. November arrived with cold rain. They were walking back from a gallery, a contemporary Korean-American art installation that Wook had taken her to, correctly guessing she'd love it, and she had spent 40 minutes in front of a particular piece while he stood beside her and did not rush her, which she recognized as its own kind of love language. The rain started 2 blocks from her apartment, fast and heavy, the kind that doesn't give you time to prepare. She grabbed his hand and ran, which she'd learned he didn't do. Wook did not run from things on principle, but he ran for her, which felt significant, and by the time they reached the awning of the nearest building they were both soaked and she was laughing. He was looking at her like he was in pain. "Stop looking at me like that," she said. "Like what?" "Like I'm something that keeps surprising you." "You keep surprising me," he said. She turned to face him fully, the rain hammering the awning above them, and she reached up and pushed his wet hair back from his forehead, and he went absolutely still the way he always did when she touched him without warning, not tense, just arrested, like the gesture had temporarily overridden all his systems. "Tell me something true," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, water dripping from his jaw. "I haven't known what to do with myself since you walked across that room," he said. "I've spent 10 years being absolutely certain of everything in my life. You made me uncertain and I should hate it and I don't." She kissed him in the rain. This was the 3rd kiss and it was the one she'd remember longest. His hands in her wet hair, his forehead pressing to hers afterward, the rain making everything private and loud and immediate. "I really didn't plan for you," she said quietly. "Neither did I," he said. "I'm still not sure I know how to do this correctly." "There's no correctly," she said. "That's kind of the point." He made a sound against her hair, not quite a laugh, not quite not a laugh. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make tea." "You make terrible tea." "I know. You make it. I'll watch." He looked at her. "Why am I in love with you?" It came out like an accident, the words arriving before he could stop them, honest and slightly horrified. She felt the shock of it go through him the moment they left his mouth. She smiled. "Say that again." "Absolutely not." "Wook? Don't say it again. His jaw tightened. Then he exhaled, the long, controlled breath of a man surrendering something hard-won. I'm in love with you, he said, lower this time deliberate. It is inconvenient and structurally problematic and I don't fully understand the mechanism, but there it is. She kissed him again, softer this time, brief and specific. I love you too, she said. For what it's worth. It's worth considerable, he said. It was always going to come to a head. In late November, a situation arose involving a rival organization. Karen didn't know the details and Wook didn't give them, but she knew from the 48 hours she didn't hear from him and the news article Priya sent her about an altercation involving parties connected to organized crime interests, that something serious had happened. When he finally came to her, he looked exhausted in a way she hadn't seen before, not physically but something deeper, like a fatigue of the soul. She opened the door and stepped aside without a word. He came in, sat on her couch. And for a while he simply sat, not talking, which she had learned to read as its own kind of communication. This was Wook before he'd organized himself enough to speak. She made tea. His way. She set it in front of him and sat beside him, close but not crowding, and waited. Someone got hurt, he said eventually. Someone I was responsible for. Are they alive? Yes. Okay, she said. Karen. He looked at her. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer without managing your reaction. Ask. Is there a version of this, of us, that you can actually live with? Knowing what my life is. Not the idea of it. The actual reality. She was quiet for a moment. I've thought about this, she said. A lot. Since your father came. And? I can't live in your world, she said carefully. I won't. My life is mine. My career, my choices, my integrity. I'm not going to be someone who looks the other way at things that matter because it's convenient. He absorbed this. That's not quite an answer. I'm getting there. She turned to face him more fully. But I also know that you are not simply what you've been handed. I know who you are when you're being honest, and that person, she shook her head slightly. That person is someone I want in my life. Those two things are in conflict. Most of the things that matter are in conflict, she said. That's not a reason to give up. It's a reason to pay attention. He looked at her for a long time. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about what it would mean to actually step back from the succession. My father expects, has always expected, that I'll take over fully when the time comes. But there are structures in place. People who could run things without me at the center. She didn't say anything. She didn't want to lead him. I'm not telling you I'm walking away from everything overnight, he said. I'm telling you that I've started imagining a version of my life where I'm not this. Where the architecture drawings on the wall are plans, not nostalgia. Why are you telling me this? He met her eyes. Because you're the only person I've ever wanted to build something real with. She felt that land deep and quiet. She reached for his hand. Then start small, she said. Don't blow up your life for an idea. Start with one honest decision and then another. That's how people change. He looked down at their hands, his thumb moving slowly across her knuckles. You're going to be a remarkable lawyer, he said. I know, she said. Are you staying tonight? Yes. Okay. She stood, pulling him up with her. You take the couch. I'll get you a blanket. I'm not sleeping on your couch. The couch is very comfortable. Karen. Wook. A long pause. The closest she'd ever seen to genuine helpless exasperation on his face, which she privately found extremely satisfying. Fine, he said. She gave him her favorite blanket and sat on the floor beside the couch, and they talked until 2 in the morning about architecture in Baltimore and his mother and her grandmother and the specific quality of wanting a future that didn't yet exist. And somewhere around 2:15 she fell asleep sitting against the couch with her head tipped back, and he carefully pulled the blanket down and covered her with it, and lay back, and looked at the ceiling. He had not slept soundly in years. He slept soundly. 6 months after the night in the social hall, Karen Ellis stood in the same building at the same end-of-semester event, a glass of Moscato in her hand, watching Wook Shin navigate the room. He moved differently than she'd thought when she first watched him. She'd read his stillness as coldness. Now she knew it as presence, the particular focus of a man who had learned to give the thing in front of him his full attention. He caught her eye across the room, and the absolute precision of his expression softened by exactly 1 degree. Jade appeared at her elbow. I can't believe this is your life now. I can't either, Karen admitted. Is he still complicated? Permanently. But good. Karen watched him hand off something to Seo and start moving through the room in her direction with the unhurried inevitability that was entirely him. "He's good," she said. "He's trying." He reached her. Without a word, he took the glass from her hand, took a sip, made a face at the Moscato and handed it back. "You have terrible taste in wine," he said. "And yet here you are." "And yet," he agreed. Jade made a small retreating sound and disappeared. He looked at her and she looked at him, and between them was everything they hadn't said yet and everything they had, and the ongoing project of two people making something complicated into something real. "Dance with me," she said. "I don't." "Wook." Pause. "Then, you're insufferable." "I know." He took her hand. He danced with her. Not well. She'd learn later that he'd been practicing in his apartment by himself for 2 weeks, which was perhaps the most Wook Shin thing she'd ever heard, but with the careful serious attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. She laughed. He didn't apologize for stepping on her foot, but he also immediately adjusted his stance and didn't step on it again, which was, she thought, an accurate metaphor for all of it. The dare had been a joke. What came after was the real thing. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder and felt his exhale and thought about her grandmother, who used to say that the most important things in life were not the ones you planned for. "Fear is just respect wearing the wrong clothes, baby," she used to say. "Learn to tell the difference." Karen had been terrified the night she walked across that room. She'd learned to tell the difference. The day Karen Ellis walked across the stage at Blackwood University's law school commencement, 3 things happened simultaneously. Her mother cried in the 3rd row, pressing a handkerchief to her face with both hands. Jade screamed loud enough to briefly disrupt the dean's applause. And Wook Shin, seated in the back, quietly without announcement, wearing a dark suit that cost more than the catering at the reception, felt something loosen in his chest that he suspected had been tight for a very long time. She found him after, in the garden courtyard where families had scattered for photographs. She was still in her gown, her graduation cap slightly crooked, and she was glowing in the way that people glow when they have accomplished something they have worked toward for years. Not surprised but satisfied, which is the deeper and rarer feeling. She threw her arms around him. He held her, fully, without the usual measured restraint. "Doctor of Law," he said against her hair. "Not a doctor," she said laughing. "Just a JD. You're splitting hairs." "I'm literally a lawyer now. Splitting hairs is the job." He stepped back and looked at her, and she registered his expression, that specific quality of attention she had learned to read over the past 2 years, the one that meant he was memorizing something. "Stop looking at me like that," she said. "I'm not doing anything," he said. Her mother appeared at her elbow, and Karen watched the interaction that had taken 6 months to become comfortable. Her mother, Diane Ellis, who had grown up with strong convictions about character and had not initially known what to do with a man who arrived in a car that cost more than her house and spoke in careful, precise sentences. Wook, who had never quite known how to be a son, but who had shown up to fix Diane's kitchen cabinet without being asked, and had listened to her talk about Karen's childhood for 2 hours without checking his phone once. "Wook," her mother said with the warmth that had taken time to earn. "Congratulations, Miss Ellis," he said. "You raised someone extraordinary." Diane pressed her lips together. "Don't you make me cry again." He planned it for 3 months. Not obsessively, or rather, obsessively in the way that was entirely consistent with who he was. He made lists. He discarded the lists. He consulted no one except Seo, who offered one piece of advice: make it about her, not about the gesture, and then wisely stayed out of it. The ring he had made. Not purchased. He'd gone to a jeweler in the Diamond District, a small Korean-owned shop that had worked with his family for years, and he'd sat across from the jeweler for 2 hours and described Karen with a specificity that had made the old man look at him with something like wonder. What emerged was a solitaire, a deep cognac diamond, warm and rich as autumn light, set in a thin band of yellow gold with 2 small baguette diamonds flanking it. Not a showy ring. A precise ring. The kind that looked like it had been made for one specific person's hand. He chose a Thursday in late October, 1 year almost to the day from the night they'd kissed in the rain. He told her he was taking her to dinner. This was not unusual. They had a rhythm by now, a settled domestic cadence that she occasionally marveled at, how naturally it had arrived. He had his world, which was still complicated and still required difficult navigation, and she had her career. She'd taken a position with a civil rights law firm in the city, which she loved with the ferocity of someone who had waited their whole life for the right work. They had built something that belonged to both of them. He picked her up at 7. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress. She hadn't known, he hadn't told her, and she'd done her hair up, and when she came to the door he looked at her for a moment too long and she tilted her head. "You're being weird," she said. "I'm always like this. You're being specifically weird." He opened the car door. He took her to the rooftop. Not a restaurant rooftop. His building, the top floor, which had a terrace she had been to 100 times but not like this. He had spent the afternoon here, directed by a very patient event person and overseen by a very skeptical CO, and what had been assembled was not theatrical. He had specifically said no theatrical. What it was warm. String lights strung low, almost like fireflies caught at standing height. A table for two with candles. And on every surface, the ledge, the planters, the small side table near the door, white orchids and dark calla lilies. The exact flowers from the first arrangement he'd ever sent her, the morning after the dare. She stepped out onto the terrace and went still. He watched her take it in, the lights, the flowers, the city spread below them, the particular smell of late October air, and he watched the moment she understood what the flowers meant, which was the moment he'd been waiting for. She turned to look at him. "You kept the flowers the same," she said. "I remember everything," he said. "You know that." Her eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together briefly. "Wook. Sit down," he said gently. "Let me feed you first." "Are you serious right now?" "Karen. Sit." She sat. He had ordered from Mrs. O's, the good tea, the food she loved, and for a while they ate and the city hummed below them and she kept looking at him sideways with an expression that was equal parts anticipation and trying to pretend she wasn't anticipating. After dinner he stood. She stood too instinctively. "Sit." "I'm not sitting for this," she said. "Don't ask me to sit for this." He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out the ring box, not dramatically, not with a flourish. Just took it out, held it in his palm and opened it. The cognac diamond caught the string lights and held them. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "You know that. I've written this in my head 100 times and none of the versions were adequate, so I'm going to say the true thing instead." She was looking at him. Her eyes were full. "You walked across a room on a dare and kissed me and I have not been the same since. You have made me want to be more honest, more present, more deserving of the trust you give me. You are the most formidable person I have ever met, and the warmest, and somehow those things live in you at the same time without contradiction." He paused. "I want to spend my life being the person you see when you look at me. I'm not there yet. But I want to spend whatever time I have getting there." He held the ring out to her. "Marry me, Karen?" Not a question which she would have called him on, except his eyes in that moment were entirely uncertain, and she understood that this was Wook asking, genuinely asking, without the safety net of knowing the answer in advance. She stepped forward and took his face in both hands and kissed him, deep and unhurried and full of every version of yes she had, and when she pulled back his eyes were closed for a moment longer than necessary. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." He exhaled. He slid the ring onto her finger and she looked down at it, and up at him, and the city glittered below them. "It's perfect," she said. "It's you," he said simply. She kissed him again, softer this time, her hands still at his jaw. He held her waist and pulled her close and she pressed her forehead to his and they stood like that for a while, not needing to say anything else, the way people who have learned each other's silences don't always need to fill them. They married in March on a Tuesday. Not a Saturday. Not in a ballroom. Not with 300 guests and a reception that cost more than a down payment on a house. Karen had been clear about this from the start. "I don't want a performance," she'd said. "I want a marriage." He had agreed immediately, which surprised her, until she thought about it and realized that Wook had spent his entire life performing for audiences. His father's world, the organization's expectations, the face he wore in rooms full of people who needed to believe a certain thing about him. The idea of their wedding being private was not a compromise. It was a relief. They married in Mrs. O's cafe, after closing. Mrs. O had wept when they asked her. Then she'd started rearranging furniture with the efficiency of a woman who was not about to let sentiment slow her down. The guest list was 9 people. Karen's mother Diane, who wore her best blue dress and cried from the moment she arrived. Jade and Priya and Demi, who had been with Karen from the beginning. CO, who stood near the door with his hands folded and looked quietly, privately moved. 2 of Wook's associates he considered, if not friends, then something close. Men who had known him long enough to recognize the magnitude of this moment. And Karen's grandmother's photograph, framed, placed on the table near the front because Karen had asked for it there. A judge friend of Wook's performed the ceremony. No elaborate script. They had written their own words, which they exchanged facing each other in the soft warm light of Mrs. O's cafe, surrounded by the smell of barley tea and the winter cold held just outside the windows. Karen spoke first, which she'd insisted on because she knew Wook needed to hear her before he could reach for his own words. I spent a long time being brave about the wrong things, she said. Being brave about fighting hard, about pushing through, about not letting fear run me. I was good at all of that. What I didn't know was how to be brave about being known. About letting someone see me fully and staying still while they looked. She looked at him steadily. You learned to see me. I want to spend my life making sure you know what it means to be seen in return. Wook looked at her for a moment. I came into this building once, a long time ago, and a woman walked across a room toward me and I thought she was reckless, he said. I understand now that what she was, what you are, is fearless. There's a difference. His voice was steady but only just. You have given me something I didn't know I was missing. Somewhere to put all the things I didn't know how to say. I will spend however long I have making sure that somewhere is safe. Rings exchanged. Plain gold bands, simple and deliberate. When the judge said you may kiss, Wook cupped her face in both hands and kissed her slowly, completely, in front of 9 people and a photograph, and Diane Ellis pressed her handkerchief to her mouth and Jade put her arm around her and Mrs. O, behind the counter, made absolutely no effort to hide the fact that she was crying. The reception was tea and the food Mrs. O had spent 2 days preparing, and music from the record player in the corner, Lee Morgan, because Karen had asked and Wook had remembered as he always remembered everything. They danced. Still imperfectly. She still laughed when he got it wrong. He still adjusted immediately and didn't do it wrong again. Near the end of the evening, while the others talked and the candles burned low, Wook stood at the window with Karen's hand in his, looking out at the March night, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. Are you happy? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. Like the word was new to him and he was deciding to trust it. She turned her hand in his and held it tighter. Thank you for watching.